Ask it.
Ask it.
Ask it.
Ask it.
Ask it.
Welcome to the Ask It podcast. The Ask It podcast encourages talking about talking, facilitates your own inner wisdom, and rather than providing answers, considers good questions. Welcome, wise ones. Today we welcome Louise Livingstone, who is the director of the Heart Sense Research Institute and the founder of the Centre for Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred. And today we're asking the question, what does your heart tell you? So welcome, Louise. Can you just give us a little bit of a background of who you are, how you came to this work, and what inspired you to do the research that you've been doing?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me, Lucinda. It's lovely to be here. Yeah, that's quite a big question. I feel like my heart's been kind of guiding me my whole life, really, particularly speaking through symptoms, physical symptoms initially. So I would say that the journey really started when I was 18. And I contracted a virus called myocarditis, and this actually enlarged my heart muscle wall, the outer layers of the heart muscle wall, and this meant that I was seriously ill, and I had quite a few cardiac arrests. And my heart was beating too fast, and then it would stop. So I had to have a pacemaker and also be medicated so my heart wouldn't sort of race off too fast either. So I was 18. And it was, quite a huge thing, really, I suppose, at that age to go through. But, I made a miraculous kind of recovery because I was really seriously ill. I was in hospital for 3 months. But then I sort of got better thanks to the wonderful treatment from, my cardiologist and the NHS, and just incredible people that helped me. And I went on to do my degree in business. So a long way away from where I am now. And then I started to have further complications when I went into my 30s. So it was a deeply stressful time for me. I was going through a divorce and I wasn't enjoying my job very much. And so I think all of that coalesced. And the place where I think I kind of store all of my stress or tension or anxiety I was learning as I was going on in my life was my chest area, was my heart. So I started to have complications then in my heart again. And I had arrhythmias. So atrial fibrillation, ventricular tachycardia, which essentially I think was caused by the expansion of the heart muscle and then the contraction of the heart muscle when I was 18. And so there was scar tissue. And so these arrhythmias were caused by the electrical patterning, the electrical circuitry in the heart just getting confused and going off down old scar lines. So the difficulty, I suppose, with that was physically, I was completely incapacitated, passing out and ending up in hospital probably once every week, really. And that was deeply distressing because nothing really could be discovered when I got to the hospital because I'd be out of the rhythm by the time I'd got to the hospital. Yeah. So this went on for a number of years, really, during my 30s. So I'm talking about the 2000s now. And I suppose, really, as time went on, I just lost faith in my heart's ability to keep me alive. I just thought I was going to die, and that nobody could help me. And I was just completely stuck. And I just sort of went into this spiral downwards, a descent into the abyss, really. So developed anxiety, agoraphobia, didn't want to leave the house. The house was about a mile away from the hospital, so I didn't want to go anywhere because, my home was the hospital. Yeah. So it had a huge effect on my mental health, really. I was in a bit of a state, really. So this is the mid-2000s now. So in the mid-2000s, I was really at a very in a very dark place. And after everything that had happened in my life, you know, and all this kind of anxiety and conflict raging in my life, and I just felt like I didn't want to carry on anymore. I just couldn't cope. I couldn't handle it anymore. And I was in this kind of panic attack in sort of about 3 o'clock in the morning one morning, anxiety raging. And I just thought, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to be here. I want to leave.
Yeah.
And that was the moment when my whole life shifted, because I heard my heart speak to me and say, Louise, you have to stop this. You know, this is your own creation, and you have the power to change it. You have the power to change this conflict. You have the power to change everything. And I was like, okay, what the hell just happened?
Well, can I just pause a minute? When you say you heard, can you describe what you mean by heard? Because we can understand that in many different ways, can't we?
Yeah. I've been asked this so many times by people, and it's hard to kind of put into words, really. It was a real sense, a visceral sense. I don't know whether it was kind of clairaudient or kind of, I don't know. It was a knowing that my heart was speaking to me. The words were my own, but I know it was my heart.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense at all.
It makes sense to me. I don't know if it makes sense to everybody, but absolutely makes sense to me.
It's really hard to describe, and I can't say it any other way. I knew it was my heart speaking to me.
And either way, it's some deep knowing that comes from your core.
Yeah. And it was, the more I think about it, the more I was so shocked at first, because I've thought about this moment over and over and over again for the past sort of 15, 16 years. And yeah, maybe, okay, over time that memory might have changed or shifted, but there is nothing that will move me from the understanding that that was my heart that was speaking to me.
Yeah.
And so it was visceral, and it's become audible. You know, I know now through the work that I've done consequently that those words that I heard, which were my own, were my heart's, because of the work I've consequently gone on to do.
Would you have described yourself as intuitive or even psychic or like anything like that beforehand? So this was completely and utterly out of your frame of reference.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I was not psychic, you know. As one would frame it in the contemporary narrative.
Yeah.
I've never heard voices. I've never seen things.
No.
I'm just an ordinary person, having had some ordinary experiences, and very much in a kind of Western contemporary framework towards the world, which is why this shook me to my core. And I knew that if there was also something in me that said, okay, I could look at this as though I could pathologize it. And I could say that this was a moment that when I was in deep distress, and it was a hallucination. It was, it was early morning. I was half asleep, half awake. But I knew that I'd never felt so bad in my entire life. And I knew that if I got to the point where I didn't want to be here anymore, that I've never been in that place before. So consequently, the research that I've done, I knew that something had broken through into my awareness. But at the time, I didn't know that. But also at the time, I knew that I couldn't just leave that and go, oh, well, that was just, something happening because I was in a deep state of anxiety and fear. It just left me knowing that there was something more to my life that I had somehow let in, or had pushed its way through into my awareness because of the state that I was in. And it sort of opened me up to this sense of something more. And if I didn't explore that something more, then that would be detrimental to my future health and well-being. It was such a visceral knowing, Lucinda, that I couldn't leave it.
Yeah, so deeply profound. And I think you know, don't we, when we have moments like that in life, we just know in our absolute core We need to take notice.
Exactly. So I took notice. Now, because I'd done a degree in business and had an ordinary Western upbringing and never had anything where anything had talked to me, or I'd seen things out of the ordinary or had any extraordinary experiences, I had no idea where to look. So I was starting completely cold. But I sort of went, I remember going into the University of Birmingham library, main library, because I worked there at the time, worked in careers. And I went into the library and I just found myself drawn to the philosophy section, because I just thought, well, maybe something will be there, but I couldn't find anything. You know, there was so many books there, I just didn't know where to start. And so what happened was then for the next couple of years, I didn't find anything, but I just carried this knowing with me that I don't know what that was. I can't find anything to kind of support or give me any information about what happened. I'm just going to have to live with it and carry on. But the condition, the anxiety, didn't get any better. And, you know, I didn't want to take medication, didn't want to do that. So I decided to have a sabbatical from work. So I took 12 months off work. And in that time, my condition got worse. So the physical symptoms got worse with the atrial fibrillation and the ventricular tachycardia. And I just ended up in hospital for quite a few months during my sabbatical year. And then, I don't know, something changed, because at the same time, I was actually a friend had recommended Reiki to me. Mm-hmm. So I trained in Reiki, and I also discovered other kind of complementary therapies, and that was where books started to arrive into my awareness that helped me to see that, oh, okay, what I was looking for in the library at the Birmingham University was maybe this kind of stuff that I'm now being introduced to. So things like Louise, You Can Heal Your Life. Those are the books that I was introduced to. And then really from there, I think my whole life just opened up into a completely different genre. That started a completely different pathway for me of looking at the world differently and bringing new ideas into my life.
It's amazing, isn't it, how when we kind of let go and trust, those synchronicities happen, and what we need to have comes to us, you know, for you in the form of books, etc. Absolutely has happened for me again and again.
And now I trust that. But at the time,
100% trust that.
At the time, I didn't realize that this was the start of my relationship, my recultivating my relationship with the world, that I realized as I was reading these books and connecting more with my heart, because I'd completely disconnected from my heart. You know, I'd lost faith in it, lost trust in it. I didn't want to talk to it. I was scared of it. I was scared of my heart. I was scared of dying. And so very, very slowly, really, over this past sort of 15, 16 years, I've been learning to cultivate a relationship with my heart, cultivate a relationship with the world, and realizing that I'm not this kind of disconnected, fragmented being all on my own in the world, that actually I'm part of a network of relationships. And I rely on the world just as much as the world relies on me, and we kind of co-create each other into being. And so I just was, I feel like it's like a retuning of my awareness from becoming so disconnected from myself and the world to now, you know, sort of being held by the world and sort of danced into being by the world, really. That's how it feels, having gone on this sort of massively long journey with my own heart. And as you say, these synchronicities come in. And it was in 2012 now that another synchronicity happened. I was getting used to them by this point, learning the new language, learning a new language of being in the world. And something happened where I actually then ended up at the Schumacher College in Devon on a master's in holistic science.
Wow.
So yeah, I took the plunge. My husband and I sold our house and left everything behind in Birmingham, moved down to Devon, and I put some of the equity from the house into studying for the masters at the Schumacher College in Devon.
You must have had great faith and a sense that this is what you needed to do, and real trust of that, because materially speaking, that's a massive decision to make.
I know.
To sell
and do you know what? I know. I look back now and I think, Louise, what on earth were you doing? But at the time, again, it was like this. Again, I would describe it as this visceral knowing that this is what I have to do.
Yeah.
Because before that, my life was not working. My life was in such a mess. I was existing. I wasn't living. I was stressed at work. My health was a total mess. The way I was looking at the world was creating conflict, not only in my own body, but in the outside world. Relationships with people were just horrendous. And I just thought, no, this isn't, I feel awful. I don't like being here in the world. There has got to be something more.
It's make or break, isn't it? That's real crisis situation.
Yeah.
So, okay, so masters in what did you say?
Holistic
science. What does that mean?
Oh, do you know what? Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that. I always remember my tutor on the course, Stephen Harding, saying, everyone asks what holistic science is, and we still haven't got a satisfactory kind of understanding of that. But essentially what it means is sort of taking our kind of contemporary way that we orient ourselves in the world, particularly through the scientific narrative, and actually opening up to the possibility of seeing more deeply through a kind of empirical lens, but allowing ourselves the possibility of being enchanted by the world itself and what we're looking at. And in that sense, it draws on the frameworks of Goethean inquiry, Goethean science, systems theory, chaos and complexity theory, that look at the idea, and also we draw a lot on quantum physics, this idea that as living beings, we are embedded in a greater whole. And that actually the kind of whole, the wholeness of what life is actually expresses itself through the parts of which we are parts in the world, but we are also wholes in ourselves.
So kind of like a holographic view of it, really.
Yeah, exactly. So meeting, particularly in Goethean inquiry, what you would do is, if you were in contemplation or relationship with a plant, for example, you would not cut that plant out of the ground and then dissect it and abstract it and look at it as a bunch of parts.
Yes.
But you would actually go to it and sit with it and explore it in its natural living environment and come to know it as it exists in its natural living environment.
Yeah, and that's what Indigenous cultures are so much better at and understand so deeply, don't they? Rather than us here in the West. We are this analytical mind that wants to break everything down and reduce everything.
Yeah. And the idea is that you can't put the part, once you've abstracted all the parts, you can't put the parts back together again to create the whole. It's actually a movement. It's a movement of the whole through the parts. And in that sense, there's a kind of subtle flip. And what this did for me over the course of the year was just kind of flip my awareness, which was always already starting to flip anyway, because of, the changes that I'd made in my own life. Flip my awareness into this understanding that I am part of a greater whole. And whatever this great mystery is, whatever life is, however we choose to define that, actually expresses itself in some way through me. And as I was living, back in the time where I was feeling so poorly, I know that I wasn't allowing life to express itself through me. It was all back to front, if you like. And what the journey that I'd been on since having this experience, and then going through the sort of experience of the holistic science masters, and philosophically embedding myself into a kind of a movement, a kind of, I don't even want to call it a process, because again, that's kind of too abstract for me. It was kind of a dance and movement, being called into the world once more. I thought, gosh, this is how I used to live as a child.
Yeah.
And there was a kind of recognition there of being so connected to something. And I realized I'd forgotten something along the way. My education, in a way, had took me somewhere else, turned my attention elsewhere.
Yeah. And I love the way you talk about dance and movement, because as a psychotherapist, I often say to, if I'm training or working with supervisees, I often say, I liken that relationship with the other like a dance, because I work very intuitively, and so I'm gauging all the time whether to move towards, whether to move away. And when it's really working, and it doesn't happen all the time, but when it's really working, and we have that term, we're in the flow, you can really feel it, because it is a sensing of exactly that, just like a dance. So I really understand your language on a very personal level.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. That the movement and the dance for me was so important in my understanding of my own connection to the world and to life and to my own body and to my own heart. So I was so inspired by the different world that I'd been introduced to on the masters that I wanted to carry on. Because I'd actually done my master's dissertation on conflict, and this understanding that how can one and the other, I was really interested in the other, and for me, my heart throughout my whole life has been the other, this other that's been trying to talk to me. And then I thought, oh, well, who are other others in my life? And then I thought, well, the other others in my life are the people that I'm having this conflict with. So the conflict just became this vehicle for me to explore the dance, this idea of movement and flow, and how could I take that further? How could I sort of dive more deeply into the conflict and this constant butting up of negativity that I'd felt throughout my whole life, pretty much. And so that was when I got in touch with Dr. Angela Voss at Canterbury Christchurch University, and just said, look, I've just done this master's and I'm interested in exploring conflict, and are you open to holding my inquiry? And she was like, yeah, great, come along. So off I went to Canterbury, and had a realization very, very early on that I was going to do this through the heart. That the heart was actually, it sounds ridiculous. But I it was probably the second week I was on my PhD. I'd started my PhD, and I went to a seminar run by one of the ladies who teaches on the MA that Angela Voss directed at Canterbury, the MA Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred. And this seminar was talking about the heart, and this lady talked about James Hillman and his idea of the thought of the heart, and the fact that a lot of the symptoms that we have in terms of heart disease and heart problems these days are as a result of the fact that the heart isn't living fully enough in people's lives, both physically and philosophically. And it was like a revelation to me. And I thought, oh my God, that's me, that's me, that's me. And I thought, and I sort of asked my heart intuitively, and I said, I need to work with you, don't I? You're going to help me understand this PhD. And I just knew it was like, yes. And that was it. So my heart became the vehicle for my PhD for understanding and working or delving more deeply into this idea of conflict.
And when I was reading your paper, I made a note that it wasn't lost on me that heart disease is the #1 killer, you know.
Yeah.
And also the other thing that occurs to me as I listen to you is that very much these days philosophy has been sidelined, hasn't it? Philosophy and meaning has really been sidelined in favour of hard science, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And I think we lose something. We lose the idea to think about meaning. And I think it costs us deeply.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think what had happened to me, particularly, all those years ago when I had that moment and my heart spoke to me, I think I'd lost all meaning in my life. Meaning had gone. I didn't know what I was living for. I just felt like this machine that was just, going to work so I could pay off my mortgage and then possibly, I don't know, have 10, 20 years afterwards to do what it is that I wanted to do. It just all felt wrong to me because I just thought, I can't just keep going like this. And I don't think that was what I came here for anyway. It didn't feel right to me. And yeah, the meaning had gone for me out of life. Even my joy and love of nature that I had when I was a child, that had gone too. There was just no joy, no meaning left in the world, and I just felt like I was on a treadmill.
Do you feel that some kind of ancestral knowledge has been lost? Do you feel like we knew a lot of this? Our ancestors knew a lot of this that we now don't.
I do. I feel, and again, as I'm talking, Lucinda, I'm not. What I don't want to do is sort of create a divide between the way that we're in the world now and what our ancestors used to know, or a kind of division between a sort of rational way, head-based, discursive intellect way of being in the world and a kind of more imagine or heart sense way of being in the world. Because I think what we have to have is a balance of both. And I think what's happened is, the way I would frame that is that it's the balance, I think, that's been sort of tipped in a sort of heavier direction towards a certain way of orienting ourselves in the world that sort of doesn't put the same value on, say, the qualities that the heart embodies, like sort of the more sensory, experiential, subjective experiences, the more imaginal, intuitive experiences that are just as much a part of our lives as the sort of discursive intellect, analytical, rational critique of the world.
Yeah, and I agree very much. I think you need both. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't think anything's necessarily been lost, because it's always there. If we've had it, it's there, and it's for us to remember that sort of in a it's part of our DNA. It's part of who we are, I believe. And the way that I see it is, it's like this seesaw, and we're kind of looking at a rebalance. And so my work has been about rebalancing, setting a platform for the heart's way of being in the world to be on a par with the sort of head-based, mind-based way of being in the world. So it's a remembering, it's a retuning of our radio, if you like. And again, just I suppose for your listeners to make clear that when I'm talking about the heart and the head, I'm using them as living symbols and living metaphors for how we orient ourselves in the world. So, and when I talk about symbol and metaphor, I use the word living. So they're not representations of something. They are actually living in the world as ways of orienting our way in the world. Okay, so that's a way of thinking with the imagination and the intuition and with the heart, not thinking about something abstracted from a place, if that makes sense. It's a very subtle difference, but the living metaphors that I use are actually real in their own sense.
So how do we begin to open up to, or find our way back to, or rebalance? How do we cultivate that? How do we practice beginning to understand and listen to what the heart's trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I can only talk from my own experience of having done this. So what I personally did was I had to start from a particular framework. And the framework was that my heart had something important to say to me. And also in relation to how I was orienting myself in the world. So there was something missing. I was looking at a kind of narrow view of reality. So the position that I took was that if my heart is talking to me, and also that there are key authors that I use to kind of enter into my PhD. In particular, I've mentioned him already, James Hillman.
Yeah.
The obviously depth archetypal psychologist, who himself was inspired by the religious philosopher Henri Corbin and his work on the heart as the organ of imaginal perception, or the organ of the imagination. And he himself obviously was inspired and deeply moved by the work of the 12th century mystic Ibn Arabi and the Sufi mystic. So again, when you actually said earlier that maybe we've lost something, yeah, this work has a heritage. You know, the heart has its own journey and has had its own life through other frameworks, through, say, Sufi mysticism. And just maybe in the Western contemporary model and framework, that our attention just got turned somewhere else, particularly from 1628, you know, when William Harvey put forward his theory of pulmonary circulation and looked at the heart and saw a left and right side to the heart. And, you know, in that moment, there's another depth psychologist as well called Robert Ramanujan, who sort of says that thought lost its heart, heart lost its thought. You know, when you see a heart as a physical organ, as something that pumps blood around the body, then something of the soul gets taken out of the heart, something of the mystery gets taken out of that particular place where the soul resided, where the Sufi mystics and then and now feel that the heart is the place where one can connect to the divine, the greater mystery.
And I know for myself, if I'm struggling in a therapy session, if I'm struggling in conflict, you know, I try to put the locus of my attention there, and that's where I imagine myself connecting from. Just naturally, that's just how I operate.
Yeah,
No,
and that's
it's not
beautiful.
coming from here. It's coming
that is
from there.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so basically, I took this understanding, this very ancient understanding, into my life, into my world, and sort of brought that in to kind of direct the PhD, really, to sort of say that, okay, this place, this organ is a physical organ, yes, because it keeps us alive, but it's also the mediator between the physical world and the greater mystery, the divine, if you want to sort of take a religious framework to it, or as Hillman took the work, the soul, from a depth psychological framing towards the world. But what it does in both of those frameworks is it actually, that the heart is a portal onto sort of sacred ground, into the self, or out into the divine.
Yeah, so instead of reducing to a process, as in, you know, what does the heart do? It pumps. It's seen as a doorway, as a gateway.
Absolutely, yeah, a gateway. And I think from the experience that I'd had when my heart had spoken to me, you know, sort of all those years ago, that gateway was really important to me, because, well, how am I going to understand the heart? You know, how am I going to understand what my heart's trying to say to me. And so these were my ways in, through Robert Romanushin, Henri Corbin, James Hillman's work, and they were the kind of foundational pins really for the work. And Robert Romanushin in particular written a wonderful book called The Wounded Researcher, came out in 2013. And he actually said that the wound of the work, actually you make a place for the wound and sort of set a platform for the wound to speak. So through his methodology, I set a sort of chair, a place for my heart to come and talk and speak to me and show me what it is that it was trying to say to me. And then, so the methodology.
Were you still fearful at that point?
Yeah.
Were you frightened about what it was?
Yeah, scared to death.
Yeah.
Because I still hadn't resolved this fear. I knew my heart was guiding me. I knew I had to follow. I'd been following for years since that point, because I didn't start the PhD until 2016. So we're now, 11 years on from that experience that I had where my heart spoke to me. So this has been a long journey, okay? And so, as I say, in the first couple of weeks of me starting the PhD, I was like, okay, I know that I've got to do this through my heart. And then I discover all these amazing authors. And Robert Romanushin is basically saying, look, this methodology of the transference dialogues where you set a space for your work to speak to you. And I'm thinking, yeah, okay, my work is my heart. My heart's got to speak to me. How on earth am I going to start a dialogue with this heart that I am so scared of?
Yeah.
Still. So I set a space for the first meeting. And I didn't know how it was going to happen. Romanushin actually says that you just set the intention and then you let it go. And so you start to learn when the research is speaking to you. And this can happen through a vision, or say when you're daydreaming or in a dream, or when you're actually sort of sitting there consciously and sort of setting a chair for your heart to speak. Kind of like in a Gestalt therapy, I suppose, is another way of framing it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it took me a couple of months actually to psych myself up to this. And I thought, right, I've got to do this. I'm going to set a place for my heart to speak to me. And yeah, I actually write about the first dialogue that I had with my heart in my PhD, and it was just so emotional, hugely emotional. I remember crying, and I just remember sitting there looking at my heart, kind of trying to work out, but you're in me and you're beating, but you're also sat outside of me, and that's strange. And I just had this kind of dialogue with my heart saying, gosh, there you are, and my heart just kind of looking at me and going, yeah, here I am. I can't put it into words.
What would you say to people who kind of question that? Because again, I think, in our kind of left brain way of being, we sort of rubbish the imagination, we rubbish dreams, we dismiss, a lot of dismissing that goes on. So what would you say to people that kind of question that?
I mean, I'd say, great. It's good to question, because I questioned. I mean, immediately after it happened, there were so many things going on. I was actually seeing a therapist at the same time, which was a good thing. So I didn't do this just on my own. I was actually working with a therapist who had actually done some sort of Sufi-based, heart-based meditation training as well. And I would go and talk to her about what had happened. And the first thing that was really key for me was that she received what I had to say.
Yes.
So she was open to the possibility of what was happening to me was real in my world.
Yes, so important. Fundamental.
Fundamental, yeah. And also, again, what I think your listeners have to understand is that these dreams and these reveries and whatever happened to me, I wrote them down in a journal, and it wasn't a linear process. So I found a place in my PhD eventually to put the first dialogue, but I didn't know where that was going to go in the thesis. So it unfolded, the whole thing unfolded as a kind of spiral, which kind of didn't unfold in the same way as a thesis is written, if you like. There was lots of going backwards and forwards and checking in with myself, and then going to the research literature and trying to find parallels with what was happening to me with what was sort of written about in the literature.
Yeah. So you're trying to validate really in that process.
Yeah, but the key to the research was the heart had to have its way with me first. I couldn't meet this as though I knew what was happening already, because I didn't know. If I started to label it, I would move out of my heart's way of being in the world into a kind of rational-based consciousness, which would have probably snuffed out what it was that my heart wanted to say before it had begun, if that makes any sense. So I had to still trust. I had to keep going and going with what was happening to me. And really trusting. It was a journey of trust and faith that what was happening was important and was leading me to places where I wouldn't ordinarily have found myself. So to people who would be skeptical, of course, I went through the whole PhD with deep skepticism. I think you have to do that. You wouldn't be doing a PhD and researching at the level if you weren't skeptical and you weren't questioning and checking things through. But what was happening as the reveries were happening and the dreams were happening was that the books would sort of come to me that I needed, that would sort of validate what was happening to me in a way. And I was finding as I was going, everything became richer, so much richer. So again, if we go back to what we were talking about right at the beginning, it felt like the whole of this research, what it was that I had come to in my life, was expressing itself through me, through the parts, through the dreams, through the books, through the conversations I was having with my therapist, through the reflections that I was then having consequently, through the life experiences that were happening to me. Because as I went deeper into the PhD, more and more conflict came into my life in terms of relationship conflict. So it was like my outer world was mirroring my inner world. So I was thinking, well, that's confirmation as well, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You know, that something is mirroring what's happening in my inner world and what's happening. And I just knew that I was on a journey, and that things were fitting together, and to just keep going and to keep following. Yeah. So, but without the critique, you know, I wouldn't have been able to have produced what I produced. But it has been enhanced so much more by the trusting.
I'm interested in one aspect, as a sideline, which is, do you think the communing with the heart, I don't even know if you would put it that way, do you think that can be the doorway to healing of other physical, physiological issues?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's a part of me that knows yes from my own personal experience. So again, I can only talk from my own personal experience. How you would measure that, I don't know. But personally, I have subsequently been for echocardiograms, which look at the functionality of the heart, and sort of can measure you know, the dimensions of ventricles and the atria, for example, in my own heart. And since I've been doing this work, I felt so much better physically. Mm-hmm. And to have a confirmation from one of the nurses who's doing the echocardiogram and looking at my heart and comparing it to the measurements that were taken, you know, 2-3 years previously, the nurse said to me, "You've improved the functionality in your left ventricle. That's really interesting." You know, I can't remember by how many percentage she said, but it was a significant percentage. And I just said to her the work that I've been doing. She said, "Oh, that's really, really interesting." And I said, "Isn't it?" You know, again, you'd have to sort of do, you know, lab-based research for that. But I know that something different has happened in the functionality in my left ventricle, in my heart. It's improved. The functionality has improved. And I also know that I'm taking much less medication than I used to take. I'm on a very, very tiny amount of beta blocker now. And even, you know, the cardiologist that I see from time to time says, "You know what, you could just, you know, have a day off once in a while. You don't need to take it. You're doing so well." And I know what the amount of medication I was on 15 years ago to being on pretty much nothing now. I'm so healthy. My whole life has transformed in relation to my relationships, the way I am with my own body, the way I am with the world. I guess I'm a living example of change.
Absolutely.
But that's my story. And I would hesitate to kind of say, "Yeah, great, everyone go out there and do this." However, I would also add to that what have we lost if we maybe look at the world or give the heart an opportunity to look at the world differently through our own experience. I would say we've probably not lost that much and maybe have the potential to gain quite a lot through the heart's way of being and orientation towards the world.
Well, certainly to think about connection and the whole working through us and us being a part of the whole. And for the specific areas that you were looking at, conflict and conflict resolution, I mean, you know, that's, if we were all thinking of it that way, there would be a lot less discord and conflict, wouldn't there, for starters?
I'd like to think that there would be.
It makes us much more open, at least, to the other.
Yeah, sure. And that to me was the purpose of the work. You know, how can we be open to the other? And so when you think about the symbol of the heart, the living symbol of the heart, okay, so what do we generally associate the heart with? The characteristics of the heart, that would be openness, kindness, compassion, non-judgment, a sort of love, a real sense of a curiosity towards another, whatever other that is, if it's a plant or a person or the world or an issue that you're dealing with. You know, for me, another other is anything that we're in relationship with. It could be anything at all. Yes. Okay, so that's no boundaries, no whatever, because we're always in relationship with something.
Yes.
And so if we can approach the other with those qualities, what does that offer? What invitation does that give the other to sort of move towards us with a sense that, oh, wow, this person is not meeting me as though they know me already. This person is open to the fact that maybe I orient myself in the world differently. And okay, that's then, oh, okay, if we feel a bit of a oosh, you know, that person sees the world that way, I see the world this way. The heart is a container that goes, okay, all right, I can expand around that kind of sense of discomfort that person maybe sees the world differently, but I'll expand around that. I'll have a go. And that's what I found in the work that I did, was the heart sort of manages to expand out into this kind of difficulty that the other may bring and opens up a possibility for a conversation. But both others need to be willing to kind of dance together in that space, because unless that willingness is there, you kind of end up with that stickiness, that conflict, that stuck blockage. So it's a way of orienting in the world that actually is work. It's hard work. You know, I think it's Rilke, the poet Rilke says, you know, heart work is hard work.
I remember very, very recently, I had a therapy session with somebody I've been working with for a long time, and we connect really well. But there are a number of issues that were very difficult for us because we were in very different places on it. We had one session where the wheels absolutely fell off, really. They really did. We both agreed. I mean, she could have walked away at that point, but we agreed to come back. And I noticed before the session that there was a lot of nervousness in me, and there was a feeling of wanting to defend myself, being a bit rigid. And I thought, no, just sit there, and again, put your consciousness in your heart, and try to speak from that place and listen from that place. And at first it was really difficult because she was so very cross with me, and to some degree, that was warranted. But I thought, no, just listen, just be from that place. And then I can only describe it as something really beautiful happened. There was just this real sense of peace and quietness between us. And I have to say it was blissful. And I think what gets misunderstood is you don't have to come away from your position. You don't have to come away from what your truth is, what your ideas are. But there was a real meeting and understanding and reverence, I would say, of each other in that moment. It was so deeply profound. And, that's what true conflict resolution is. But as you say, the reason I'm sharing that is because we were both willing, and it was excruciating to begin with. It's actually much less painful, I think, to sidle up to somebody and headbutt them or, give them a whack. It was more excruciating to sit there and think, oh, okay, I've got to invite this in. But amazing to come out the other side of that. And I don't use that word lightly. It was truly amazing.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. That's the work. I mean, something very similar happened to me when I was actually doing this work on the PhD, and I had a very difficult relationship with somebody for about 18 months, and the whole thing was excruciating. But I knew I had to stay in the heart, and it was like this was without resolution. It was a long time, 18 months, nearly 2 years. And I just kept staying with it, knowing, trusting that whatever was meant to be was meant to be. I just had to keep stretching, opening with curiosity, wonder, not meeting as though I had to resolve it straight away. And then this most beautiful thing happened one evening where it was just something really simple. And I'd picked something up and said, I was out and about a couple of months ago. I saw this, thought of you, wanted to give it to you. And I gave it to this object, to this person. And then it was like, oh my goodness, that's beautiful. Thank you. And then something melted.
Yeah.
And it was like, I'm so sorry for what's happened. And, really grateful to be in this space with you. And it was nothing that could have been engineered, nothing that could have been got to by a step-by-step process. It had its own time. The heart was having its way with both of us, and we trusted. We just kept trusting. And it happened when it was ready, when the time was ready, because we were both open at that point.
So that leads me on to maybe one of my final questions to you, which is, how can our listeners, our viewers, how can they begin to sit down and find a way into that deep inner knowing?
I mean, I think, like I said before, our hearts have been part of our lives from way back in the womb. I think it's one of the first organs that forms and beats. This recognition, this heart connection that we have is part of our DNA and part of who we are. And it's just that maybe today we have a framework of orienting ourselves towards the world that says that through the living metaphor of the heart and the head, the brain, the mind, that the rational discursive intellect situated in the head is the way that's the way we make sense of the world. That's what has value. That's the way forward. However, that's great and it has its place. However, what would it look like if we brought that sort of way of knowing, that organ of perception back into our life, opened up to the possibility that these qualities, these characteristics, a particular way of knowing that your heart has and that you've always had intuitively, and it's always been there available to you. What would it be like if you opened up to the possibility that that could also direct your life in some way? And what would it be like if you sort of brought that into balance with your sort of main way of orienting yourself in the world? My work is to open up that possibility and to say that this way of being in the world does have value, because what have we lost if we allow ourselves that possibility? I would say very little. We've probably gained more, to be honest. And a way of connecting back into that space is to just allow yourself the possibility to drop back into that space. And for some people that's hard because it's in the body, and a lot of us have got into our heads and moved our way out of the body. So this is about becoming embodied, moving back into the heart space. I mean, I've written my PhD. Somebody could pick up my PhD and follow that and have a look through that for inspiration. I've just also written a sort of very reduced paper, I think, which you've read, Lucinda, on the PhD. I've just written a paper about sort of a synopsis of the PhD, which somebody could dip into, which will be available very shortly in a journal.
Because you give exercises, don't you?
I do give exercises,
and gateways and ways to approach this work, which I do, and were amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to get your feedback of the experiences that you had working through that paper. So the paper's 30 pages, whereas the PhD is 365 pages. So the paper will be, I think, ready on my website in the next few weeks. It'll be available in the next few weeks, so people could work through that. Also, I have heart sense groups. So I've got a heart sense group that I'm working with right now. I don't have a massive amount of people, about maximum 10. I'm starting a new group in May. So if people were interested in sort of working with me through the different hearts that I met in my PhD in an experiential way, working alongside me, and I take people into contemplations and some of the sort of contemplative exercises that I did, that's starting again in May. So I'm taking a group in May. Otherwise, just consciously making the intention to talk to their own hearts and just say, what is it that you want to show me? What do you want to tell me today? And to just consciously bring the heart back into a conversation with you in the world.
So if there was one thing that you wanted to leave people with, Louise, what would that be?
I would say that there's two things. To open up to the possibility that the heart has validity. The heart's way of knowing does have validity. It's not a place of just pure sentimentality and to be trivialized. That narrative has served us to a particular point, but I don't feel that it's serving us anymore. And so therefore we can now open ourselves up to the possibility of a sort of more expanded world through the knowingness of the heart. So to open up to the possibility of what the heart could show you. And secondly, that to not think about the heart from the head, from the discursive intellect, but to make a conscious effort to think with the heart, because there's a distinct difference between the two. And when you bring the heart back into your life and think with your heart, that's where things really start to change and transform. And so those are the two key things I think that I'd like to leave your listeners with today.
Wonderful. So it's okay for people to contact you?
Oh yes, please. Yeah, please do.
I mean, I've put some links on the bottom of the podcast, but how do people contact you? Where do we find you? Right,
so I've got a couple of websites. So heartsenseresearch.co.uk. I also am co-founder of the Centre for Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred, and you can find a lot of my work there too. So that is mythcosmologysacred.com. And if anyone wants to email me, you can email me at Louise Livingstone, that's all one word, all lowercase, at heartsenseresearch.co.uk.
Thank you so much, Louise. That's been
Oh,
really,
thank you for
really
having me. It's been wonderful.
So, and I don't know, maybe because there's so much, I had so many questions and so many things, but I didn't want to be rigid. I wanted to go with the heart. So I wonder, maybe later on in the year, perhaps we could do a part 2. I'm sure.
Oh, do you know what? I would love to come back, because there's so much really I feel that I haven't had the chance to say, you know, because it needs framing first of all.
Yes.
In a particular way. So I would love to come back and dig deeper. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Okay.
Hi everyone. If you like asking questions like me, please like and subscribe. Thank you.